Welcome to the second online class on Dr. Samuel Johnson's poem London. In the first class, we read the poem up to line 34. That was the introductory part of the poem, and it was narrated by the poet himself, or to be more precise, by the narrating persona assumed by the poet himself. The rest of the poem is narrated by Thales, who is the chief narrating persona of the poem, and obviously Dr. Johnson's spokesperson for this particular satire. Today we shall discuss the poem up to line 82, starting from line 35. And there, as we noted earlier, that from line 35 onwards, the entire poem is a long speech by Thales, who is now about to leave the city of London, as he is very much dissatisfied and disgusted with its vices, with the vices and moral depravities of its diplomats, politicians, and citizen in general. Now, Thales' speech continues. He has taken a very contemptuous, angry, indignant look at the city of London as he is standing on the banks of River Thames, waiting for a ferry that would transport him to the Wales, to Cambria, where he wants to settle for the rest of his life. So after having taken a look at the city of London, Thales begins his speech. Since worth, he cries, in these degenerate days, wants even the cheap reward of empty praise. So Thales says that these days, the present days, are degenerate. These days are debased from the earlier days of England's glory. And nowadays, worth or value does not have any real merit in itself, and it seems to have been sold to empty, hollow, and false praises. And Thales means to say that in the present vitiated society of London, there is nothing called true value or true worth of anything, because value or worth can be purchased at the expense of hollow, empty, and false praises. In those cursed worlds devoted to vice and gain, since unrewarded science toils in vain. Those cursed worlds signify the walls of academic institutions, which Thales deems to be doomed and condemned because they have sold themselves to monetary profits. Academic institutions do not anymore cultivate true science or true knowledge, and are principally concerned with monetary profit, and therefore they have turned into something vicious as the society and the political scenario of the time. And he says that within the boundary of these condemned worlds of academic institutions, learning can never flourish, because these institutions are devoted to vice and monetary profit, monetary gain. Since hope but suits to double my distress, and every moment leaves my little less. And then he says that if I hope for a better future, that hope only doubles, only enhances my disappointments, my anxieties, and my mental plight, because those hopes are false and futile. They do not cater to me the vision of a better future, but what they present in front of me is merely an illusion of a better future, and I know that there will not be a better future. the world will go on like this till my death. And he says, every moment leaves my little less. I do not have many more years to live, and what remains of my life is gradually coming to an end. Then he says, while yet my steady steps no staff sustains, and life still vigorous revels in my veins. But he says, though I have become old, though I am not going to live for much long time, I still have steadiness in my steps. I still can stand and walk steadily on my foot, on my feet, and I do not require the help or assistance of a staff or stick to support me. And the life force still runs very vigorously through my veins. I still have physical strength in my body. Then he prays to God, prays to heaven, to grant me the opportunity to find a better place to live in for the rest of his life. He says, grant me, kind heaven, to find some happier place where honesty and sense are no disgrace. Obviously, he thinks that as long as I am in the vicious city of London, my good senses and my virtue of honesty are interpreted here as something disgraceful. My good senses and my virtues do not have any worth for the vicious people of London. Here, these are matters of shame for a person to be of good sensibilities and of capable of having good senses. So he prays to the heaven, saying that grant me the scope, the opportunity to find a happier place than this London. Then in the next few lines he goes on describing what kind of a happier place, a better place he actually wants for settling in. Some pleasing bank where verdant osiers play, some peaceful vale with nature's paintings gay. So that is the mental picture this tales portrays to give a notion of the place where he wants to settle in. There must be a pleasing bank, a very pleasant, beautiful river bank where verdant osiers play, which is decorated with dense groves or forests of willow trees. Verdant, this epithet means lush, green, and abundant, and osiers signify willow trees. And the poet uses the verb play after osiers because when wind moves or blows through the leaves of willow trees, it creates a sort of musical tune. So the poet uses this expression, where verdant osiers play, where I can hear the mellifluous sound of the leaves of willow trees when wind will blow through them. Some peaceful vale with nature's paintings gay, and that place where I want to settle in should have a very beautiful and peaceful valley. Vale is an archaic word for valley. With nature's paintings gay, with very beautiful and happy decorations, paintings by nature. That scene should be very beautiful as created and painted by nature herself. Where once the harassed Britons found repose, and safe in poverty defied his foes. Here, the harassed Briton stands for the ancient English or British tribe called the Britons, who took refuge to the Wales when England was invaded by the Saxons and Jutes, the Germanic tribes who invaded England during the Middle Ages. And the poet here means to say that I want to settle in such a beautiful and peaceful spot of land that was at one point of time occupied by the banished Britons who took refuge to the Wales during their period of banishment from the city of London. And safe in poverty defied his foes. So one such Briton who took refuge to the Wales lived his life in poverty, but even in his poverty he could defy, he could very contemptuously disobey his foes or enemies, who were the Germanic tribes, the invaders of England. So Tales means to say that I also want to live peacefully in such a place where I may have acute poverty, but I will not have any more turbulence or disturbance ensuing from my enemies, who are obviously the present day diplomats and politicians of London. Then he says, some secret sail ye powers indulgent give, let Dash live here, for Dash has learned to live. And he says, he obviously prays to divine powers, saying that please, you indulgent powers, you generous heavenly powers, please grant me some secret cell. I do not want a large palace to live in. Please give me a very decent and very small residing place, a cell rather, where I can live peacefully, and let my enemies, let my foes reside very luxuriously in the city of London. Let Dash live here. Here, for obvious reasons, Dr. Johnson does not mention any name, but critics later on suggest that this Dash might be filled in by George II, who was the then English king. Now, had Dr. Johnson used the proper name of the present king, then he must have faced very rigorous penal action for sedition or for satirizing the king himself. So he deliberately leaves the space blank. But we can obviously substitute the blank with the name of George II, who ruled England from 1727 to 1760. And this poem, as we know, was initially written in 1737 and later modified 10 years later. So he says, let George II live here, for George II has learned to live. So a corrupt king like George II has learned how to live very luxuriously and live a life full of vices, full of moral depravities. I have not learned to lead such a vicious, corrupt life, so I pray to heaven to grant me a decent small cell, a small house or small room to live in at a very peaceful plot of land. Then he says, what kind of people should actually live in the city of London? Here let those reign whom pensions can incite, to vote a patriot black, a courtier white. Now, as we noted earlier, this poem has very strong political overtone, and it is full of numerous topical references. During Dr. Johnson's time, pensions were often granted to those who served the government very well, who did not defy governmental orders and who always tried to please the higher authorities of the government. And so Dr. Johnson thinks that pensions were often provided to people, to superannuated people, as a form of bribe to incite them to keep on supporting the government even after their retirement. So he says that here in the city of London, let those reign, let those rule over who can be incited, who can be bribed, and who can be encouraged by pension given by the government. And in lieu of getting a handsome pension, they would do whatever the government would tell them to do. And after having a handsome pension from the government, such people might scandalize a true patriot, and they can advocate for the honesty of a corrupt courtier. That is what is meant by the expression to vote a patriot black, a courtier white. A courtier obviously here suggests a Whig courtier, a Whig minister, or a Whig diplomat, whom Dr. Johnson thinks to be corrupt and vicious. And he says that here in the city of London, there are a lot of superannuated people who would solicit in favor of corrupt politicians, and they would very easily scandalize and defame a true patriot. Then he says, explain their country's dear-bought rights away and plead for pirates in the face of day. Now, he thinks that such people who take pension from the government somewhat in the form of bribe and plead for corrupt politicians and scandalize true patriots would very easily liquidate the gravity of the dear-bought glories of the very of the glories and renowns earned by the British throne, earned by the country of England at a high price, very easily and very unscrupulously. They would explain away, their very speeches would liquidate all the gravities of the hard-earned renowns and glories of our nation, and they would plead for pirates in the face of day. Now here pirates suggest the Spaniards, because during the 18th century, especially during the ministership of Horace Walpole, the Spaniards were allowed to check and search all the British ships that traded with their American colonies, and the decision of allowing Spanish ships to check and search British ships was taken by the Whig ministry, and it was defended in the Parliament, in the British Parliament, though later it failed to be implemented because of the strong opposition from the Tories. And so here Dr. Johnson calls the Spaniards pirates, and he means to say that our corrupt politicians, our diplomats would not shy away from very openly advocating for the pirates, for the enemies of our country. With slavish tenets taint our poisoned youth, and lend a lie the confidence of truth. And he says that let those reign, let those rule over London who would taint, who would pollute, who would contaminate the minds and spirits of the youth of our country with slavish tenets, with very lowly principles, with very servile principles. They would contaminate the spirits of the youth of our nation and lend a lie the confidence of truth, and they would wash away, liquidate the confidence or the basis of truth. There will not be anything called absolute truth if they succeed in ruling over this country for long. They would not only pollute the high spirits of the young generation, but they will also destabilize the very basis of truth. Here, lie, L-Y-E, might mean either L-I-E, lie, a falsehood, or it might also mean some kind of a detergent, a sort of alkaline solution used for washing clothes. So, here it might mean that these people would wash away the foundation of truth, will liquidate the strong foundation of truth. And it might also mean that these people would turn the truth into a falsehood. So, for these somewhat 6 or 8 lines, Thales describes the kind of people who are in power at present and who would be ruling the city of London in his absence. And he says that as I do not have all such vices, I am not the fit person to reside in London anymore. Let such raise palaces and manors by, collect a tax, or farm a lottery. Now, farming a lottery, as well as being by profession a tax collector, were very profitable jobs during the 18th century. And so Dr. Johnson here says that let such people, let such vicious, maneuvering, corrupt people accumulate more and more wealth day by day by being a tax collector or by being the owner of a lottery, and let them buy huge palaces, let them buy manors or big farmhouses. With warbling eunuchs fill a licensed stage, and lull to servitude a thoughtless age. And as they are holding both financial and political power, let them rule over this nation for the time being, and with their accumulated wealth, they will not only control the economic and political scenario of our country, but they will also pollute and debase the glorious cultural heritage of our nation. They will turn this entire age, this entire generation into a thoughtless one who would not bother to engage their intellect into something meaningful, into something very very mind-boggling. Rather, they would engage themselves in idle and indecent entertainments. With warbling eunuchs fill a licensed stage. Warbling eunuchs signify male singers or male sopranos or castrated singers who would sing in a very shrill voice in some opera. And the phrase licensed stage signifies that kind of stage performance, that kind of theater or opera which could procure a license from the ministry, from the government. Because during the 18th century, especially during Walpole's prime ministership, the Theatre Licensing Act was passed in the year 1737, the same year when Dr. Johnson composed the first version of this particular poem. And that Theatre Licensing Act of 1737 required all plays, all operas to get a certificate, to get a license from the government officials, so that nothing against the government could be performed on stage. So, Dr. Johnson here implies that when London society is ruled by these people, these vicious, opportunist, and corrupt people, literary pieces written by me in which I criticize the government would not be allowed to be performed. But these people would keep on engaging eunuchs or mediocre singers to perform on the stage, and thus lull, thus put to sleep a thoughtless audience, an audience that does not engage their critical faculty to enjoy something that has intellectual merit. That is what he means to say here. Then he very ironically says, heroes proceed. So he very ironically and sarcastically calls these calls the present rulers of the London society heroes. What bounds your pride should hold? Your pride here, pride does not actually mean pride. Here, pride signifies unrestrained power, and what should I say? Their enjoyment of sovereignty all over the nation. And he means to say that your power is sovereign, your power is unquestionable. There is nothing to put a limit on your enjoyment of your absolute power. What check restrain your thirst of power and gold? There is no hindrance, no impediment to check, to restrain your lust for power and gold. In the absence of any morally righteous person who can criticize you, who can put a restraint on your activities, you enjoy the absolute liberty to enjoy power and to accumulate gold or material wealth. Behold rebellious virtue quite overthrown, behold our fame, our wealth, our lives your own. So he says that you can easily see in front of your eyes that virtue, the deity of virtue, has been overthrown by your activities. You have completely disregarded virtue, and you are consuming all the fames, all the wealths of our glorious nation. You are eating up, devouring the fames, the wealth that our nation had accumulated for all these long years and centuries. And you are also sucking up our lives, the lives of innocent citizens, by your vicious activities. To such a groaning nation spoils are given when public crimes inflame the wrath of heaven. So he says that to such people, to these kind of vicious, opportunist, corrupt diplomats and politicians, the spoils of this groaning nation, this country which is groaning, which is crying out of pain uh, are given. Here, spoils mean the plunders of colonial rule, the plundered wealth that England collected from its colonies. That is what is meant by the word spoil, used as a noun. So, all the spoils, all the wealth that our nation had collected so far by plundering our colonies are given to you, given to people like these. When public crimes inflame the wrath of heaven, and they are public crimes, they are open, uh, they are open and uncovered, undisguised crimes are agitating gods in heaven. But what, my friend, what hope remains for me who start at theft and blush at perjury? And then he asks his friend, the poet, that is there any hope left for me in this land, in this country, especially in this city of London? What hope remains for me who start at theft? For a people like me who start at theft. Here, start means to be startled or to be amazed, to be worried. For such a person as I am, who easily gets amazed at a theft, who gets very much disturbed at such a petty crime as theft, and who blush at perjury, who becomes ashamed of the petty crime of perjury. Perjury means lying in a court of law. So, what he basically means to say is, I am unsuitable for this city because such petty crimes as theft and perjury are very much rampant in the city of London, and I am such an innocent and honorable person who cannot tolerate such crimes to happen in front of my eyes. So there is no hope left for me. Who scarce forbear, though Britain's court his sing, to pluck a titled poet's borrowed wing. Here he metaphorically compares a poet to some kind of a singing bird, and he says that I do not care whether a titled poet sings in the royal court. If I find his singing or his poetry disagreeable, I can hardly refrain from plucking at his borrowed wings. Here he thinks that as a bird must naturally have its wings, a poet, when he is compared to a bird, should also have wings, but a false poet, a poet lacking in true poetic merit, has borrowed wings from some other poet, and though he has somehow managed to get some title conferred upon him, I can scarcely refrain from plucking at his false wings, even if he is singing in the royal court. A statesman's logic, unconvinced can be here and dare to slumber over the gazetteer. And he says that I can still remain unconvinced after hearing the logic of a present day statesman, a present day diplomat of London. A contemporary diplomat of London cannot dupe me, cannot overwhelm me by his logic or by his arguments. I can still remain unconvinced after hearing what a diplomat has to say. And I dare to slumber over the gazetteer. The gazetteer, the daily gazetteer, was then a government gazette which was funded by the English ministry and which used to plead for the activities of the ministry of the government and which often published apologia in favor of the government. So Dr. Johnson, for obvious reasons, thinks that this gazetteer is a very unworthy kind of a gazette, and so Thales would not um, have any compunction to sleep over such a worthless paper as the Gazetteer, the Daily Gazetteer. Despise a fool in half his pension dressed, and strive in vain to laugh at H.Y.'s jest. And I can easily be hateful towards a fool, towards a braggart, towards an unworthy buffoon who is wearing a very expensive dress at the cost of almost half of his pension, and I really do not find anything agreeable or anything witty in the stupid jests of H.Y. Here, obviously, he slurs the entire name of the person for the fear of being sued in court. But critics identify this H.Y. as John Henley, who was a very widely known public buffoon at that time, and who was a supporter of the Walpole government, and who often pleaded for the activities of Sir Robert Walpole, Sir Horace Walpole, excuse me, I am sorry, it is Sir Robert Walpole. So this buffoon, this professional jester called John Henley, often publicly supported the Walpole government, and so Dr. Johnson thinks this Henley to be a very worthless kind of a jester, and says through the mouth of this Thales that I must strive, but in vain, to laugh at the stupid jests of Henley. The jests of John Henley are so absurd and so gross and stupid that a sensible person cannot be amused at those jokes. Then he continues, others with softer miles and subtler art can sap the principles or taint the heart, with more address a lover's note convey, or bribe a virgin's innocence away. Then he says that there are other kinds of politicians and diplomats who are more skillful and are subtler in their arts of deception. They have softer smiles and subtler art, so their maneuvering activities are more refined and less crude than the other politicians and other supporters of the Walpole government. They are such as can very trickily manipulate the minds and principles of people. They can gradually vitiate, destroy, and corrupt the principles that the English citizens cherish, and they can, with such subtle tricks, taint the heart, pollute or vitiate or contaminate the heart. With more address, here address means skill or trick. With more address a lover's note convey, or bribe a virgin's innocence away. And their arts, their tricks are even subtler than the skills of a lover. As a lover succeeds in seducing a virgin or an innocent lady, similarly these politicians, these diplomats seduce English citizens and gradually corrupt their principles. Well may they rise, while I, whose rustic tongue ne'er knew to puzzle right or varnish wrong, spurned as a beggar, dreaded as a spy, live unregarded, unlamented die. And he finally says that let such people, let all these corrupt politicians live and flourish here, let them be prosperous, let them rule over this city, while a person like me who has a rustic tongue, here rustic tongue means unsophisticated manner of speaking, who calls a spade a spade, while I, whose rustic tongue ne'er knew to puzzle right or varnish wrong, and with my unsophisticated manner of speaking, I never knew how to turn something black into white or something white into black. I never knew how to puzzle or to confuse the right into something wrong, or I never knew how to varnish or how to polish the wrong, how to present what is wrong in an agreeable manner. This simply means that I never knew how to turn right things into wrong or wrong things into right. I never knew that art of duplicity, that art of mischief. And therefore, I have always been spurned or rejected, disregarded as a beggar, and dreaded as a spy. Because of this straightforward manner of mine, I have always been deemed by the government or those who support the government as either a beggar or a spy. When they counted me to be a spy on them, they dreaded me, they feared me, and when they saw my deplorable financial status, they contemptuously rejected me as a beggar. And therefore, he says that he has so far lived unregarded. He has lived his life up to this point without any regard, without any recognition from the public at large, an unlamented die. He would die without his death being lamented by anybody, because he is not a popular public figure like the corrupt politicians. So let us stop here for the time being at line 82. In our next class, we shall continue our discussion from line 83 onwards. Thank you for watching.